Look at the road ahead of you, if you can even see it through the haze of diesel fumes and debt, and tell me you don't feel the floorboards rotting beneath your feet. You've been told for decades that the American trucker is the backbone of the nation, the nomadic king of the interstate, the literal pulse of the supply chain that keeps the heart of the empire beating. But while you were busy chasing miles and fighting sleep, the architects of the system were quietly installing the gallows. They call it a freight recession, a temporary dip, a cyclical correction in the logistics sector. But that's the kind of sanitized corporate jargon designed to keep you from grabbing a pitchfork, because the truth is far more predatory. We aren't looking at a dip, we are looking at the deliberate liquidation of an entire class of independent labor, a systematic extraction of value where the driver is no longer the asset but the friction to be removed. You see the headlines on CNBC talking about cooling inflation and a resilient consumer, yet they conveniently forget to mention that the cost of moving that consumption is collapsing into a black hole that is swallowing owner-operators whole. Look at the numbers if you want to see where the bodies are buried, because the freight rate per mile has drifted into a territory that doesn't just skip profit. It actively cannibalizes your equity every time you turn the key in the ignition. We are sitting at a junction where the national average van rate is struggling to stay above $2 a mile, while your operational costs, from the predatory insurance premiums to the price of a replacement transmission, have scaled to a peak that makes survival a mathematical impossibility for anyone without a billion-dollar balance sheet. The mainstream media paints a picture of a supply chain that is finally healing from the pandemic trauma. But what they really mean is that the leverage has been violently ripped back from the hands of the working man and handed back to the shipping giants and the mega carriers on a silver platter. Do you remember 2021? When you were the hero, when the spot market was a goldmine, and everyone from the White House to the local news was begging you to keep the shelves stocked? But that was just the cheese in the trap. The institutions watched you take out interest loans on overpriced rigs, watched you expand your small fleets at the top of the market. And then they systematically choked the life out of the demand side while the Fed cranked the interest rates to a 20-year high of 5.25%. They didn't just raise rates to fight inflation. They raised them to break the back of the independent contractor who dared to think he could own a piece of the American dream without a leash. Now you're staring at a Class 8 truck market where used values have plummeted 40% from their highs, leaving you underwater on an asset that's costing you more in maintenance than it generates in revenue. It's a liquidation waterfall, a beautifully orchestrated execution where the big players like Knight-Swift or J.B. Hunt are just waiting for the small fry to suffocate so they can vacuum up the market share for pennies on the dollar. The institutional framing of this collapse is perhaps the most sickening part of the entire charade, because they want you to believe this is just the invisible hand of the market at work. They point to the fact that nearly 30,000 trucking companies shuttered their doors in the last year alone as a sign of market rationalization, as if your life's work, your sweat, and your family's stability are just excess fat that needed to be trimmed from the ledger. They talk about the capacity overhang like it has a weather pattern, instead of a direct result of their own manipulation. While the spot market bleeds out, the big brokerage houses are squeezing the margins until there's nothing left but bone, laughing all the way to their quarterly earnings calls where they brag about cost savings initiatives and margin expansion. Every time you take a load that barely covers the fuel and the tolls, you are providing exit liquidity for a system that has already decided you are obsolete. They don't want a nation of independent operators with autonomy and dignity. They want a consolidated, automated, and subservient fleet of corporate drones who ask for a fair share because they're too busy trying not to drown in the debt load the banks strap to their backs. The American dream of the open road has been converted into a high-tech panopticon where every minute of your life is tracked, logged and monetized by people who have never spent a night in a sleeper cab in their lives. The electronic logging device ELD wasn't about safety. It was about data harvesting and behavioral control, ensuring that the human element could be squeezed for maximum efficiency until the technology is ready to replace you entirely. You are being farmed for data while your margins are being incinerated. Even the fuel prices aren't just a reflection of global oil markets. They are a tool of attrition. Diesel prices stay stubbornly decoupled from the crude oil drops because the refining capacity is being diverted to more profitable ventures, leaving the guy at the pump to subsidize the transition to an ESG-compliant future he never asked for and couldn't afford. You're standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down at the wreckage of the owner-operator model, and the people in the mahogany offices are telling you to jump because they already bought the land at the bottom. This isn't just a bad season for trucking. It's just the final act of a play where the protagonist dies so the shareholders can live another day. Every time you pull into a truck stop and see the for sale signs or the vacant stares of men who have lost everything, you're seeing the future of the American middle class. We are witnessing the death of the last true blue-collar frontier, the one place where a man with a truck and a work ethic could build a life without bowing to a corporate master. That door is being slammed shut and bolted from the inside. The massive influx of venture capital into digital freight brokerage was not meant to make your life easier. It was designed to commoditize your labor to the point of worthlessness, using algorithms to find the absolute lowest price a desperate man will accept to keep his lights on for one more week. It's a race to the bottom, and the finish line is a graveyard of repossessed Peterbilts and shattered families. You aren't just fighting a tough market. You are fighting a globalist financial structure that views your independence as a threat to its totalizing control. They want you hungry, they want you desperate, and they want you gone. And if you do want wake up to the reality that the game is rigged to ensure your failure, you'll be the next piece of debris swept off the highway of history. The devastation doesn't stop at the fuel pump or the interest rate on your predatory loan. It seeps into the very marrow of the infrastructure you once thought you owned, revealing a landscape where the data is the new oil and you are merely the discarded filter. If you want to see the real horror, stop looking at the shiny brochures for the new electric rigs and start looking at the divergence between the industrial production index and the sheer volume of ghost trucks haunting the parking lots of bankrupt terminals. We are operating in a reality where the freight volume has decoupled from the actual labor of moving goods thanks to a systematic implementation of algorithmic suppression that favors the mega fleets who can afford to run at a loss just to starve you out. The institutions are playing a game of attrition, using the current 5.3% Fed funds rate as a garrote to ensure that no small operator can refinance their way out of this graveyard. While you're calculating how to stretch your last few $100 to cover a blown tire, the private equity vultures are sitting in glass towers in Greenwich, looking at heat maps of your desperation, waiting for the exact moment the repossession agents can move in to seize the assets for a fraction of their utility value. This is the great consolidation, a term they whisper in boardrooms while they publicly lament the unfortunate market conditions that are supposedly beyond their control. Don't let them lie to you about the driver shortage. That persistent myth the VA spent millions of dollars to cement in the public consciousness just to justify the mass importation of cheaper, more exploitable labor and the eventual rollout of autonomous death traps. There is no shortage of drivers, there is a shortage of people willing to be bled dry for the privilege of sleeping in a tin box while the value of their dollar is incinerated by a central bank that treats your grocery bill like an inconvenient rounding error. Look at the balance sheets of the major brokerages who are reporting record-thin margins. They aren't losing money because the economy is slow. They are losing money because they are aggressively undercutting the floor to kill the competition, which is you. They are subsidizing the destruction of the independent owner-operator model, using the cheap credit they secured before the door slammed shut. They've built a digital wall between you and the shipper, a parasitic layer of logistics tech that takes its 20 or 30% cut while doing nothing but pushing bits across the screen, leaving you to handle the diesel, the insurance, the maintenance, and the physical toll of a 1,000-mile run. The real knife in the back is the looming specter of the green transition, which is being used as a regulatory bludgeon to force you off the road. Look at the mandates coming out of California and the ripple effect they are rehaving across the Tier 1 states. It's a death sentence for any truck older than 5 years, a deliberate move to make the cost of compliance so high that only the corporate behemoths can survive. They want you to trade in your reliable paid-off rig for a $250,000 electric fantasy that can haul a full load across the Rockies without stopping for a 6-hour charge every few hundred miles. It's not about the environment. It's about the elimination of the last vestige of the American entrepreneur who can be easily tracked, taxed, and throttled by a central server. They are turning the highway into a factory floor where you are just a replaceable part in a machine that is programmed to replace you the second the software is good enough. Every time you see a headline about a successful autonomous truck run between Tucson and Phoenix, that's not progress you're looking at. It's a countdown timer to your obsolescence, funded by the very tax dollars you paid while you were actually doing the work. Think about the psychological warfare of it all, the way they've tricked the American consumer into demanding free 2-day shipping, a logistical impossibility that is only made possible by the literal destruction of your quality of life. You are the hidden subsidy for the billionaire class's vanity projects. They've commoditized your time to the point where an extra 15 minutes at a loading dock time you are unpaid for can be the difference between making your mortgage payment or losing the house. The detention time game is a perfect microcosm of the institutional contempt for the trucker. Your time has zero value in their ledger, a free resource for them to waste while they optimize their own internal metrics. It's a form of modern sharecropping where you own the tools, but the plantation owner owns the road, the load and the price, leaving you just enough to keep the engine turning, but never enough to actually get ahead. You're running on a treadmill that's getting faster and steeper, and the people holding the remote are wondering why you're starting to sweat. The data doesn't lie, even if the suits on the television do. When you see the cash freight index plummeting while the cost of parts and labor for repairs has spiked by nearly 30% in the last 24 months, you are looking at a mathematical impossibility of survival. This is a controlled demolition of the middle-class mobility that the trucking industry represented for a century. The plumbing of the American economy is being repiped to bypass the individual and flow directly into the vaults of the institutional landlords. They don't want you to have a 401k or a house in the suburbs. They want you to be a permanent renter of your equipment, your housing, and your very life, paying a subscription fee to the entities that orchestrated your downfall. The sheer arrogance of the soft landing narrative is an insult to every man who has had to tell his kid they coot uncoat to camp this summer because the truck needs a new DPF filter that costs more than the family car. This is the cold, hard reality of the predator's trap. They didn't just wait for you to fail. They designed a world where failure was the only logical outcome for anyone who tried to play by the old rules. So here you are, standing at the final checkpoint of a collapsing era, clutching a steering wheel that feels more like a heavy iron shackle with every passing mile. The cold execution isn't coming from a single disastrous event or a sudden market crash, but through the agonizingly slow bleed of your autonomy, a terminal diagnosis delivered in the form of 1,000 microtransactions and regulatory strangulations. You've been told that if you just work harder, if you just take one more backhaul for a rate that doesn't even cover your lunch, the market will turn, and you'll be back in the driver's seat of your own destiny. But that's the ultimate institutional lie. The reality is that the market they speak of has been replaced by a closed-loop system where the house always wins, and the player that SU is being systematically cashed out. Look at the carnage in the bankruptcy courts where iconic names and decades-old family fleets are being liquidated to pay off the very banks that lured them into expansion during the peak. They want you to believe that your failure is a personal shortcoming, a lack of grit, or business savvy. But how can you compete against a printing press when the big carriers can tap into lines of credit at rates you'll never see? While you're stuck paying 18% on a repair bill, the outcome was decided before you even left the yard. The ghost protocol is now in full effect, and you can see its shadow in the way the industry talks about you in the past tense. They are already pricing in a world without the American trucker as a middle-class pillar. They look at your 401k, your equity in your home, and your modest dreams of retirement, and they see untapped efficiency gains for their shareholders. They've turned the highway into a digital strip mine where they extract every bit of data from your driving habits, your fuel consumption, and your rest cycles, all to feed the machine that will eventually render your physical presence unnecessary. You are literally paying for the development of the technology that will replace you, subsidizing your own extinction with every tax dollar and toll fee. The psychological execution is the most brutal part because it robs you of your pride. It turns the king of the road into a variable logistics unit on a spreadsheet. They want you to feel small, to feel lucky just to have a load, while they ignore the fact that without you, the entire glittering facade of the modern world grinds to a halt in less than 72 hours. They bank on your silence and your exhaustion, knowing that a man who is working 20 hours a day just to break even doesn't have the energy to fight the system that's crushing him. This is the moment where you have to strip away the patriotic slogans and the industry propaganda and look at the numbers with the cold eyes of a coroner. The commercial real estate bubble is bursting, the consumer is tapped out on credit cards with average interest rates hovering near 25%, and the plumbing of the global economy is backing up with the toxic sludge of unpaid debt. When the retail giants stop moving product because the American family can no longer afford the basics, you are the first one they throw overboard to lighten the ship. You aren't a partner, you're ballast. The institutions have already shifted their capital into automated hubs and last-mile delivery drones, leaving the long-haul operator to rot in a stagnant pool of declining rates and rising costs. They are waiting for the final wave of repossessions to clear the field so they can reset the entire industry under a model of total corporate ownership. They don't want owners, they want serfs who lease their lives by the hour. Every safety regulation, every environmental mandate, and every market correction is just another brick in the wall they are building around your future. So, what do you do when the road you've spent your life on leads directly into a brick wall? You stop believing the fairy tales. You stop listening to the analysts on the news who treat your livelihood like a line graph and start recognizing that the survival of the independent trucker is a direct threat to the centralized control the banks crave. They want a predictable, programmable, and perfectly compliant supply chain. And a man with his own truck and his own mind is the ultimate variable they can control. The collapse is here, not as a bang, but as the quiet hiss of air, leaving a punctured tire in the middle of a desert. You can choose to keep chasing the mirage of a recovery that was never meant for you. Or you can face the brutal truth that the system you served has already moved on. The institutions have made their play, the traps are set, and the exit ramps are being closed, one by one. You're not just fighting for a paycheck anymore. You're refighting for the right to exist in an economy that has decided you are an inconvenient legacy of a bygone age. The lights of the next truck stop might look like a sanctuary, but in this landscape, they read just the glowing eyes of a predator waiting for you to pull over and give up. Survive if you can, or get crushed in the gears of the machine they've built to replace you. Either way, the road doesn't care, and neither do the people who own it. It's your move, and the clock is ticking on a debt you can never fully repay.